Jessica Collins, 28, stared at the yellowed police report in her trembling hands, tears streaming down her face. For 12 years, her parents had blamed her for the accident that left her brother paralyzed, 12 years of guilt, family ostracism, and self-hatred. But the truth in these faded pages revealed a family secret so devastating it would shatter their entire foundation. Her father had lied to everyone, including the police, and now she finally had proof. Before I dive into how my entire family dynamic was destroyed by a single lie, I'd love to know where you're watching from today. Drop your location in the comments below, and don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe if you enjoy real-life family drama stories. Trust me, what my father did to protect his reputation while sacrificing mine will leave you shocked, and the karma that followed. Absolutely worth sticking around for. I remember June 15, 2011, with painful clarity. I was 16, and my brother Ethan was 14. It was the kind of perfect summer day that promises endless possibilities, sunny skies, temperatures in the mid-80s, and the intoxicating freedom of having just finished our final exams. Our family lake house in upstate New York had been our summer retreat for generations, a place where the Collins family could escape the pressures of my father's high-profile law career in Manhattan. That morning, Dad had been particularly agitated. His law firm was handling a major corporate merger, and even though we were supposed to be on vacation, his phone hadn't stopped ringing. Mom was busy preparing for the arrival of her sister's family the next day, frantically cleaning a house that was already immaculate, her way of channeling anxiety about hosting her perpetually judgmental sister. "Jessica, take your brother out on the boat," Dad had ordered, not looking up from his laptop. "I need some quiet to finish this brief." I didn't want to take Ethan out. I had plans to meet up with Luke Peterson, the local boy I'd been secretly seeing whenever we came to the lake. At 16, those stolen moments felt more important than anything else in my universe. But arguing with my father when he was in work mode was never an option in our household. "Fine," I muttered, grabbing the keys to the family speedboat. "Come on, Ethan." My brother bounded after me, excited about the prospect of spending time on the water. Ethan had always been the golden child, charming, athletic, and effortlessly likable. Where I struggled with social anxiety and fitting in, Ethan collected friends like treasures. My parents never tried to hide their favoritism, something that had created a quiet resentment I carried but never voiced. "Can I drive today, Jess?" Ethan asked as we made our way down to the dock. "Dad's been teaching me when you're not around." I hesitated. Ethan was only 14, below the legal age to operate a boat in New York State. But Dad had apparently been letting him practice, and refusing would only lead to an argument that would eventually reach our father's ears. "Just for a little while, in the open water where there's no other boats," I conceded. "And if anyone comes close, I take over immediately." Ethan's face lit up with excitement as we boarded the sleek mastercraft. I helped him go through the pre-launch checklist Dad had drilled into us, checking the fuel levels, ensuring the drain plug was secured, inspecting for any obvious mechanical issues. Everything seemed in order. As we pulled away from the dock, I scanned the shoreline, hoping to catch a glimpse of Luke. We had arranged to meet at the secluded cove on the north side of the lake at noon. It was only 10:30, but I was already plotting how to convince Ethan to head in that direction. Once we reached the center of the lake, I reluctantly slid over and let Ethan take the wheel. He handled the boat confidently at first, making wide, gentle turns and maintaining a reasonable speed. I began to relax, thinking Dad had indeed taught him well. "Look how smooth I am," Ethan boasted, increasing the throttle slightly. The boat surged forward, cutting through the water with greater force. "That's fast enough, Ethan," I cautioned, noticing we were approaching the narrower channel that connected our section of the lake to the larger body of water beyond. "Just a little faster," he pleaded, pushing the throttle forward before I could stop him. The boat leaped ahead, the bow rising as we accelerated. I reached for the wheel, but Ethan playfully blocked me. Ethan, seriously. Slow down. I shouted over the roar of the engine. What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion. A fishing boat appeared around the bend of the channel, directly in our path. Ethan panicked, jerking the wheel hard to the right while maintaining our speed. The sudden, sharp turn at high velocity was too much for the boat's stability. Physics took over as the mastercraft began to list dangerously to the left. I lunged for the throttle, cutting the power, but it was too late. The boat's momentum carried us into a violent flip that threw us both into the water. I surfaced quickly, gasping for air, my life jacket keeping me afloat. But Ethan wasn't immediately visible. "Ethan!" I screamed, spinning around in the water. "Ethan!" The fishermen from the other boat were already moving toward us. One of them pointed, and I saw Ethan floating face down about 20 yards away. The next minutes were a blur of horror, the men pulling Ethan's limp body into their boat, performing CPR as they radioed for emergency services, my desperate swimming to reach them. By the time we reached shore, an ambulance was waiting. The paramedics worked on Ethan with grim efficiency, eventually stabilizing him enough for transport. I rode in the ambulance, soaking wet and in shock, watching as they fought to keep my brother alive. At the hospital, the news came in devastating installments. Ethan had suffered severe trauma to his spinal cord. He would live, but he would never walk again. And somehow, through the chaos and confusion of that terrible day, a narrative emerged that I had been driving the boat, a narrative that my father reinforced when speaking to the police and insurance investigators. I was too stunned, too overwhelmed by guilt and grief to contradict him. When he pulled me aside in the hospital corridor and hissed, "You were responsible for him. You were supposed to be in charge. If anyone asks, you were driving," I simply nodded, numb to everything except the knowledge that my brother's life had been irrevocably altered. That evening, as my mother sobbed in Ethan's hospital room and my father paced the corridors making calls, Officer Rivera took my statement. Under my father's watchful gaze, I heard myself say the words that would define the next 12 years of my life: "It was my fault. I was driving too fast. I didn't see the other boat in time." The lie felt like acid on my tongue, but in that moment, I believed I deserved the blame. If I hadn't been thinking about Luke, if I had been more assertive with Ethan, if I had taken the wheel back sooner, my mind raced through all the ways I could have prevented the tragedy. My father's stern expression as I confessed to a crime I didn't commit seemed to confirm what I already felt: I had failed my brother in the worst possible way. That night marked the beginning of my exile within my own family. I just didn't know it yet. The months following Ethan's accident transformed our family into something unrecognizable. Our home, once filled with laughter and the typical chaos of family life, became a shrine to my brother's rehabilitation and a monument to my perceived failure. My parents poured all their resources, emotional, financial, and temporal, into Ethan's recovery, while I became increasingly invisible except when I served as a convenient target for their grief-fueled anger. My father's law firm handled the insurance claims and the minor legal issues surrounding the accident. Because I was a minor at the time and had no prior incidents, the legal consequences were relatively light: community service, a boating safety course, and the devastating loss of my college fund to help pay for Ethan's ongoing medical expenses. The financial penalty was my father's addition, not the courts, though I wouldn't discover this until much later. "You're lucky you're not in juvenile detention," my father would remind me whenever I expressed any need or desire of my own. "After what you did to your brother, you should be grateful we still provide a roof over your head." My mother's rejection was less verbal but equally painful. She couldn't look at me without her eyes filling with tears, couldn't speak to me without her voice trembling with barely suppressed rage. The warmth that had once characterized our relationship. Shopping trips, late-night conversations, the comfortable shorthand of mother and daughter, evaporated overnight. In its place grew a glacial distance that expanded with each passing day. School became my only escape, though even there, the whispers followed me. In our affluent community where everyone knew everyone else's business, I became that Collins girl who crippled her brother. Former friends drifted away, uncomfortable with the tragedy and unsure how to act around me. Teachers treated me with a cautious sympathy that felt worse than outright condemnation. Only Luke Peterson maintained contact, though even our relationship changed dramatically. Our carefree summer romance transformed into something heavier, with Luke assuming the role of my emotional support system. At 17, he wasn't equipped for such responsibility, and the burden strained our connection to its breaking point. "I don't know how to help you, Jess," he admitted one evening as we sat on his family's dock, months after the accident. "You're different now. It's like you're carrying this weight that keeps pulling you under, and I can't keep both of us afloat anymore." I couldn't blame him. I was drowning in guilt and isolation, and my desperate clinging to our relationship wasn't healthy for either of us. When he left for college the following year, our contact gradually diminished until it faded completely. Another loss in a growing inventory of absences. At home, Ethan's attitude toward me underwent the most confusing evolution. Initially, in the hospital and during early rehabilitation, he had been almost protective, insisting to our parents that the accident wasn't entirely my fault. "We were both being stupid," he'd said during one of my father's tirades. Jessica warned me to slow down. But as the reality of his condition settled in, the grueling physical therapy sessions that yielded minimal improvements, the adjustments to life in a wheelchair, the painful reassessment of his athletic aspirations, his resentment grew. Encouraged by our parents' open blame of me, Ethan gradually adopted their narrative. I had been reckless, I had ruined his life, I owed him a debt that could never be repaid. By the time I graduated high school, the family dynamic was firmly established. Ethan was the victim who demonstrated inspirational courage in the face of adversity. My parents were the dedicated caregivers making heroic sacrifices. And I was the selfish, careless sister who had brought this tragedy upon our family. My college years provided geographical distance but no emotional respite. I attended the state university on scholarship, the only way I could afford higher education after my college fund had been redirected to Ethan's medical expenses. My parents made it clear that this separation was a relief to them. "It will be easier for Ethan not to see you every day," my mother explained clinically as I packed my belongings. "The reminder is difficult for him." I called home weekly during my freshman year, desperate to maintain some connection to my family. The conversations were painfully brief and formal, centered around Ethan's progress and my parents' sacrifices. When I shared news of my academic achievements or social activities, I was met with indifference or thinly veiled accusations of selfishness. "It must be nice to be carefree while your brother struggles every day," my mother remarked when I mentioned joining the university newspaper. After a while, I stopped calling as frequently. By my junior year, contact had dwindled to major holidays and occasional family emergencies. I created a new life for myself at college, making friends who knew nothing of my past, building an identity separate from the narrative of blame and guilt that had defined me at home. I majored in journalism, drawn to the idea of uncovering truth and giving voice to those who had been silenced. The irony wasn't lost on me. I had accepted a false narrative about myself for years, yet I was developing skills to challenge misinformation in the wider world. Perhaps subconsciously, I was preparing for a reckoning I couldn't yet imagine. During my senior year, I met Cameron Richards in an investigative reporting seminar. Brilliant, compassionate, and perceptive, he noticed the way I flinched when family was mentioned, how I never went home for weekends, the careful boundaries I maintained in our growing relationship. "You're carrying something heavy," he observed one night as we walked back to my apartment after a late study session. "I don't need to know what it is. But I want you to know that whatever happened in your past doesn't define who you are to me." For the first time in years, I felt seen, not as the villain in my family's tragedy, but as a complete person with value beyond a single terrible day. Cameron's acceptance created a small crack in the wall of shame I had built around myself, a first step toward questioning the narrative I had accepted for so long. After graduation, Cameron and I both found jobs at a regional newspaper in Chicago, far from New York and the painful memories it contained. I told myself this geographical distance was healing, that establishing my career and building a life with Cameron was moving forward rather than running away. But deep down, I knew that until I confronted the truth about the accident and my family's response to it, I would never be truly free. The exile from my family had become self-imposed, a protective measure against the constant reminders of my supposed guilt. But exile, I was learning, didn't lead to resolution, only to a different kind of pain. Chicago embraced me in ways my family never had. The city's vastness offered anonymity, while its vibrant journalism community provided purpose. At the Chicago Sentinel, I started in the local news division, covering city council meetings and community events, seemingly mundane assignments that I approached with meticulous attention to detail and unwavering commitment to accuracy. My editors noticed. "Collins, you treat every school board meeting like you're uncovering Watergate," my editor, Diane Mercer, remarked after I submitted a particularly thorough piece on education budget allocations. Her tone was approving rather than critical. "That's not a criticism. We need more reporters who understand that sometimes the biggest stories are hidden in the most ordinary places." Within 18 months, I had moved to the investigative team, where my partnership with Cameron flourished both professionally and personally. We specialized in exposing systemic inequities, housing discrimination, environmental injustice, corruption in public services. Each story we broke reinforced my belief in the power of truth to catalyze change, even as I continued to live with the unresolved falsehoods in my own history. Our apartment in Wicker Park became the home I had lost, a space where I could exhale completely, free from judgment or constant reminders of past failures. Cameron filled our small two-bedroom with plants and vintage photography prints, while I contributed an ever-expanding library and a collection of unusual coffee mugs from the various neighborhoods we covered in our reporting. "You know what I love about us?" Cameron said one Sunday morning as we lingered over breakfast by the window overlooking the bustling street below. "We're building something genuine together. No pretense, no hidden agendas." I smiled in response, ignoring the twinge of guilt his words triggered. Because despite our closeness, there was still one subject I kept carefully contained: my family. Cameron knew the basic outline: estrangement following my brother's accident, my perceived responsibility, the emotional cutoff that followed. But I had never shared the full weight of the guilt I carried, the corrosive shame that still occasionally woke me in the middle of the night. My contact with my family had dwindled to perfunctory holiday calls and obligatory birthday emails. I sent gifts to Ethan religiously: books, adaptive gaming equipment, specialty items I thought might make his life more comfortable, most of which went unacknowledged. My parents' communications were brief and formal, focused primarily on updates about Ethan's medical status or therapy milestones. 3 years into our life in Chicago, Cameron proposed during a weekend trip to Lake Michigan. Standing on the shore with the city skyline behind us, he offered not just a ring but a promise of continued partnership in all things. "I want to build a life with you, Jess. The real you. Not the version you think you have to be for anyone else, including me. Whatever you're carrying, whatever you're still processing, I'm here for all of it." I accepted with tears and genuine joy, but the moment was bittersweet. A wedding traditionally meant family, and family meant confronting the chasm that had grown between us. That evening, I made the call I had been dreading. "Mom, I have news. Cameron and I are engaged." The silence on the other end of the line stretched uncomfortably before my mother responded with characteristic detachment. "I see. Have you set a date?" "Not yet. We're thinking next spring, maybe. I wanted to let you know, and to ask if you and Dad and Ethan would come." Another pause, this one filled with the weight of 12 years of estrangement. "I'll have to check with your father." Ethan's schedule of therapies is quite demanding, and travel is difficult for him, as you know. The familiar guilt rose like bile. Of course. I understand. We could help with arrangements if. That won't be necessary, she interrupted. We'll discuss it and let you know. The conversation ended shortly after, leaving me hollow and Cameron furious on my behalf. They've had 12 years to process, Jess. At some point, their continued punishment of you becomes a choice, not a reaction. I knew he was right, but breaking free from the narrative of blame that had shaped my young adulthood wasn't simple. Despite my professional commitment to truth, I had accepted my family's version of events without question, allowing their perception to become my reality. Planning a wedding without family support proved both liberating and painful. Cameron's parents embraced me completely, including me in their family traditions and treating me with the casual affection I had once taken for granted from my own parents. My colleagues at the Sentinel became my surrogate family, throwing an engagement party and offering to help with wedding preparations. 6 months before the wedding, my father called, a rare occurrence that immediately put me on edge. Jessica, your mother and I have discussed your invitation. We've decided that it would be best if we declined. Ethan feels that seeing you on such a celebratory occasion would be difficult for him. I had anticipated this response, but the reality of it still stung. I understand, I replied automatically, the words hollow. We'll send a gift, of course, he added, as if this material offering could substitute for their presence. After hanging up, I sat motionless at our kitchen table until Cameron found me there hours later, still staring at the silent phone. They're not coming, I said simply. Cameron knelt beside my chair, taking my hands in his. Then we'll surround ourselves with people who choose to be there, who see your value and celebrate our love without conditions. The wedding planning continued, and I immersed myself in work as a distraction. Our team was investigating corruption in city construction contracts, a complex story requiring intensive research and source development. The focus required was a blessing, allowing me to channel my emotional energy into something productive rather than dwelling on my family's rejection. 2 months before the wedding, I received a large envelope from New York. Inside was a check from my parents, a substantial sum with a brief note, for your new beginning. Mom and Dad. No congratulations, no personal message, just financial support offered as a substitute for emotional presence. I stared at the check for days, conflicted about whether to accept it. Eventually, Cameron and I decided to use half for our honeymoon and donate the other half to a spinal cord research foundation in Ethan's name, a gesture of both acceptance and boundary setting that felt right, if complicated. As our wedding day approached, I told myself that I had created a new life, a better life, built on truth and mutual support rather than obligation and blame. But the absence of my family would leave a visible gap in the celebration, an empty space that no amount of new connections could completely fill. On a crisp October morning, 3 months after our wedding, I received a call that would unravel the carefully constructed narrative of the past 12 years. The Sentinel's receptionist patched through a call from a Detective Michael Ramirez with the New York State Police. Ms. Collins? I'm following up on some cold cases from the Lakeside region. Your name came up in connection with a boating accident in 2011. I was hoping to ask you a few questions. My heart hammered against my ribs. I'm not sure what help I could be after all this time, I managed to reply, gesturing frantically to Cameron across the newsroom. He immediately approached, concern etched on his face. Sometimes fresh perspectives emerge with time, Detective Ramirez explained. I'm particularly interested in some discrepancies in the witness statements we have on file. I put the call on speaker as Cameron sat beside me. What kind of discrepancies? Well, for one, the statement from the occupants of the fishing boat that was nearly hit. They described seeing a young male operating your family's boat at the time of the accident, but the official report lists you as the driver. I'm trying to understand the contradiction. The floor seemed to drop away beneath me. For 12 years, I had carried the guilt of an accident I didn't cause, and now this detective was casually confirming what I had begun to question only in my most private thoughts. I had been made to take the blame for something that wasn't my fault. I need some time to process this, I stammered. Can I call you back? Detective Ramirez agreed, providing his direct number. As soon as the call ended, I collapsed into Cameron's arms, 12 years of suppressed emotions breaking through the carefully maintained dam of my composure. They knew, I whispered through tears. They must have known I wasn't driving. Cameron held me tightly. What do you want to do? That question initiated a journey I had been avoiding since the accident. With Cameron's support, I requested a week off from work and booked a flight to New York. Not to confront my family, I wasn't ready for that yet, but to revisit the scene of the accident and speak with Detective Ramirez in person. The lake house had been sold years ago, shortly after the accident, another casualty of the increased medical expenses and emotional trauma. I booked a room at a small inn in the lakeside town, feeling like both a stranger and a ghost returning to haunt familiar ground. Detective Ramirez met me at the local police station, a weathered building that had likely changed little since the day of the accident. He was younger than I had imagined, probably in his early 30s, with the earnest demeanor of someone committed to his work. I appreciate you coming all this way, he said, leading me to a small conference room where several folders were spread across the table. I've been reviewing accidents involving minors as part of a safety initiative, and yours stood out because of the inconsistencies. He opened the thickest folder and slid it toward me. This is the original accident report, including witness statements. Take your time. With trembling hands, I began to read. The fisherman's statement was unambiguous. They had seen a young male operating the speedboat at the time of the accident. They estimated his age at 13 to 15 years old. They clearly described seeing me reach for the controls just before the boat capsized. More damning was the statement from Luke Peterson, who had been watching from a distance, waiting for our prearranged meeting. He had told police he saw Ethan driving the boat and had witnessed similar behavior on previous occasions when my father allowed Ethan to operate the vessel despite being underage. But the official report, finalized 2 weeks after these initial statements were collected, listed me as the operator. The change was accompanied by a supplementary statement from my father, claiming that the witnesses must have been confused, that I had confessed to him immediately after the accident that I had been showing off by driving too fast. Your father is Harrison Collins, the attorney, correct? Detective Ramirez asked quietly. I nodded, unable to speak past the knot in my throat. The investigating officer at the time noted some concerns about possible influence being exerted, but nothing came of it. Your father's firm had significant connections with the county prosecutor's office. The implication was clear. My father had used his legal influence to alter the narrative, to shift blame from Ethan, who had been operating the boat illegally with my father's permission, to me. And I had accepted that blame, carried it for 12 years, allowed it to reshape my identity and sever my family relationships. Can I get copies of these documents? I asked, voice barely above a whisper. Already prepared them for you, Ramirez replied, sliding a large envelope across the table. Ms. Collins, I should mention that the statute of limitations on any potential criminal charges related to false statements has expired. This is purely informational at this point. I nodded, understanding what he wasn't explicitly saying. There would be no legal consequences for my father's manipulation of the investigation. Any resolution would have to come from confronting the truth within our family. Before leaving the station, I asked Detective Ramirez one final question. How did you happen to reopen this specific case after all this time? He hesitated before answering. We received an anonymous tip suggesting we review the witness statements. Someone who felt the truth needed to come out. I thanked him and left, walking aimlessly through the small town that had once been our summer haven. Who had sent the tip? Luke Peterson, carrying guilt about his silence all these years? One of the fishermen who had rescued Ethan? Or someone closer to home, my mother, perhaps, finally finding the courage to challenge my father's version of events? That evening, I called Cameron from my hotel room, the documents spread across the bed. I don't even know how to process this, I admitted. For 12 years, I believed I was responsible. I built my entire identity around that guilt. What do you want to do with this information? Cameron asked gently. It was the second time he had posed that question, and this time I had an answer. I need to confront them. Not for revenge, but because I need to understand why. Why they let me carry this burden for so long. Why our family was sacrificed to protect, what? My father's reputation? Ethan's sense of responsibility? The next morning, I drove to my parents' home in Westchester County without calling ahead. The house looked smaller than I remembered, the imposing colonial that had once seemed the perfect reflection of my father's status now appearing merely ostentatious and cold. My mother answered the door, her expression shifting from surprise to guarded caution when she recognized me. She had aged more than the years warranted, fine lines around her eyes and mouth testifying to the stress of the past decade. Jessica. We weren't expecting you. I know. May I come in? She hesitated, then stepped aside. Your father is at the office. Ethan is at physical therapy. Perhaps it was better this way, starting with my mother, who had enforced my father's narrative but hadn't created it. I followed her to the kitchen, the heart of any home but particularly this one, where family meetings had always been conducted over my mother's stress baking. True to form, she began pulling ingredients from cabinets. I'm making scones. Would you like some tea while we wait? Mom, I said quietly, placing the envelope on the counter between us. I know the truth about the accident. Her hands froze over the flour canister, but she didn't look up. What are you talking about? I have the original witness statements. I know Ethan was driving the boat. I know Dad changed the official story. The measuring cup in her hand clattered to the counter, sending a small cloud of flour into the air. When she finally met my eyes, hers were filled with a complex mixture of emotions, fear, relief, and a deep, abiding sadness. I think it's time we talked, Jessica. Really talked. For those of you following my story, I know this moment feels like a bombshell, and believe me, sitting in that kitchen with those documents between us, I felt like my entire world was shifting beneath my feet. If you've ever had a moment of shocking clarity about your past, I'd love to hear about it in the comments. And if you're finding value in my journey, please hit that like button and subscribe to stay with me through the confrontation that's coming. The truth was finally emerging, but the hardest conversations were still ahead. My mother's hands trembled as she prepared tea, a ritual she had performed thousands of times now rendered unfamiliar by the weight of our impending conversation. The kitchen, with its gleaming granite countertops and high-end appliances, had always been her domain, a controlled environment where she could maintain the illusion of perfect family order. Now that illusion was crumbling, and neither of us knew what would remain when the dust settled. I should call your father, she said weakly, reaching for her phone. No. My voice was firmer than I intended. I need to hear your version first, Mom. Without his influence. She sank into a chair across from me, suddenly looking much older than her 58 years. I don't know where to begin. Start with why, I suggested, struggling to keep my voice level. Why let me believe it was my fault all these years? Why let me carry that guilt? She stared into her teacup as if it might contain the answers neither of us had been brave enough to seek. It wasn't a single decision, Jessica. It was 1,000 small compromises that led us here. She looked up, her eyes rimmed with unshed tears. Your father was terrified after the accident. Not just about Ethan's condition, but about the potential consequences. Consequences for whom? I pressed. For Ethan? For Dad? for all of us. Your father had explicitly told Ethan he could drive the boat if you supervised. He'd been letting Ethan practice for weeks. If that had come out, a prominent attorney knowingly allowing his underage son to operate a vessel illegally, there would have been professional repercussions. The insurance might have refused to cover Ethan's medical expenses. There could have been criminal charges. The familiar anger that had simmered beneath my grief for years bubbled to the surface. So instead, you let me take the blame. You let me believe I had ruined Ethan's life. You let our entire family fracture to protect Dad's career and reputation. It wasn't supposed to be forever, my mother whispered. Just until the insurance and legal issues were resolved. But then Ethan wasn't getting better as quickly as we'd hoped, and your father he couldn't face what he had done. It was easier to maintain the narrative, to direct his guilt outward rather than inward. And you went along with it, I said, the accusation hanging between us. She didn't deny it. I failed you, Jessica. I failed both my children by not standing up to your father, by allowing his fear and pride to dictate our family's response to the tragedy. The front door opened, interrupting our conversation. Ethan's voice called out, Mom? We're back early. Dr. Marshall had an emergency. My mother's eyes widened in panic, but it was too late to warn him. Ethan wheeled into the kitchen, my father following close behind. Both froze at the sight of me sitting at the table, the incriminating documents spread before me. Jessica? Ethan's surprise seemed genuine, without the immediate hostility I had come to expect. At 26, he had grown into a handsome young man, his shoulders broad from years of wheelchair use, his face more angular than the rounded boyishness I remembered. My father's reaction was markedly different. His expression hardened as his gaze fell on the police reports. What is the meaning of this? He demanded, lawyer mode engaging instantly. I think you know exactly what this means, Dad, I replied, standing to face him directly. I've seen the original witness statements. I know Ethan was driving the boat when it capsized. I know you changed the story to protect yourself. My father's face flushed with anger. You have no idea what you're talking about. Those witnesses were confused. You admitted you were driving. Because you told me to. I shouted, years of repressed rage finally finding voice. You pulled me aside in that hospital corridor and instructed me to take the blame. I was 16 and traumatized, watching my brother fight for his life. I would have done anything you asked in that moment. Ethan's expression shifted from confusion to dawning comprehension. Dad? What is she talking about? My father attempted to regain control of the situation. Ethan, your sister is clearly still processing her guilt in unhealthy ways. These old reports prove nothing. They prove everything, I interrupted, turning to Ethan. The fishermen who rescued you clearly stated they saw a young male, you, driving the boat. Luke Peterson gave a statement confirming he had seen you driving on multiple occasions with Dad's permission. The investigating officer noted concerns about potential influence being exerted on the case. Ethan looked stricken, his gaze shifting between me and our father. Is this true? Was I driving? My father's silence was damning. My mother finally found her voice. Harrison, it's time. We can't keep doing this to our children. The confirmation seemed to hit Ethan physically. He wheeled backward slightly, as if trying to distance himself from the revelation. All this time, you let me believe Jessica was responsible? You let me resent her, shut her out of my life? His voice rose with each question, years of misplaced anger redirecting toward its proper target. My father's composure finally cracked. I was trying to protect our family. The insurance wouldn't have covered the medical expenses if they knew Ethan was driving illegally. My firm's reputation would have been damaged. I could have faced disciplinary action from the Bar Association. I made a decision in a moment of crisis. You made a decision to sacrifice our daughter, my mother interrupted, standing beside me now in a gesture of solidarity that came 12 years too late. And I let you. We both failed Jessica terribly. Ethan wheeled closer to me, his eyes filled with a mixture of horror and remorse. Jess, I don't know what to say. I've been so angry with you for so long, and it was never your fault. It wasn't yours either, Ethan, I said softly, reaching for his hand. You were 14. Dad let you drive knowing it was against the law. What happened was an accident, but what came after, that was a choice. My father sank into a chair, the weight of his deception finally too heavy to bear. I never intended for it to go on so long. But as time passed, it became harder to tell the truth. The story was established. Everyone had accepted their roles. Admitting what really happened seemed like it would only cause more pain. More pain than what you put Jessica through? Ethan demanded, a protectiveness in his voice I hadn't heard since we were children. She lost her family, Dad. I lost my sister. And for what? To protect your reputation? The confrontation continued for hours, painful truths emerging like shrapnel working its way to the surface after years embedded below the skin. My father alternated between defensive justifications and moments of genuine remorse. My mother revealed her own silent struggles with the deception, how she had almost confessed to me multiple times over the years but had lacked the courage to challenge the narrative my father had established. Ethan's reaction surprised me most. His anger at our parents eclipsed any lingering resentment toward me. The realization that he had been manipulated into rejecting me, that our relationship had been another casualty of my father's deception, seemed to wound him deeply. I want to know everything I missed, he said late in the evening, after our parents had retreated to their bedroom to process the fallout of our confrontation. Your college graduation, your wedding, tell me about your husband. Cameron, right? Is he good to you? As darkness fell, Ethan and I began the tentative process of reconnection, sharing the stories of our separate lives like explorers mapping unknown territory. The ground beneath us was still unstable, the future of our family uncertain, but for the first time in 12 years, we were speaking truth to each other. When I returned to my hotel that night, I called Cameron. It's done, I told him, emotionally exhausted but lighter than I had felt in years. Everything's out in the open now. Are you okay? He asked, concern evident even across the distance. Not yet, I admitted. But I think I might be, eventually. We all might be. As I fell into an exhausted sleep, I realized that confronting my family had never been about revenge or even vindication. It had been about reclaiming the truth of my own story, and perhaps, if we were very lucky, finding a way to write a new chapter together. The days following the confrontation unfolded like a fever-breaking, painful and disorienting, but with the promise of healing to come. I extended my stay in New York, booking a room at a nearby hotel rather than sleeping in my childhood home. The distance felt necessary as we all adjusted to the seismic shift in our family dynamic. My father, stripped of the protective narrative he had maintained for over a decade, cycled through stages of defensiveness, anger, and finally, a tentative acceptance of responsibility. His professional instincts initially drove him to damage control, suggesting we keep the truth within the family to avoid any potential professional consequences even now. The statute of limitations may have expired on criminal charges, but the court of public opinion has no time limit, he argued during one of our tense family discussions. What purpose does it serve to spread this story beyond these walls? It's not about public shaming, Dad, I countered. It's about living honestly. I can't build a relationship with any of you that's founded on continuing to pretend. Surprisingly, it was Ethan who became my strongest advocate. This isn't about you anymore, he told our father bluntly. It never should have been. Jessica deserves whatever closure she needs, whatever that looks like. My brother's support was both unexpected and profoundly moving. We spent hours together, sometimes talking, sometimes sitting in companionable silence as we navigated the complicated terrain of our reconnection. One afternoon, as I pushed his wheelchair around the neighborhood park, at his request, a reversal of roles that felt symbolic, he broached the subject that had been hovering between us. "I need you to know that I didn't always believe it was your fault," he said, his gaze fixed on the path ahead. "In the beginning, I remembered the truth. I knew I had been driving. But everyone kept telling a different story, Dad, the doctors, even you eventually. And it was easier to accept their version because the alternative meant accepting that I had caused my own condition." "You were 14, Ethan," I reminded him gently. "Neither of us should have been blamed for an accident." He nodded slowly. "I think I started to believe the lie because I needed someone to be angry at besides myself. And you were the perfect target because you never fought back. You just accepted it all." The observation was painfully accurate. I had embraced the role of family scapegoat, internalizing the blame until it became part of my identity. "I think I needed to believe it was my fault too," I admitted. "It gave me the illusion of control. If I caused it, then maybe I deserved everything that came after." Over the following days, my mother embarked on her own journey of atonement. Where my father struggled to move beyond self-protection, she seemed desperate to make amends, cooking elaborate meals I remembered loving as a child, unearthing photo albums and mementos she had preserved despite the family fracture. "I saved everything," she confessed, showing me a box containing newspaper clippings of my college journalism awards, printouts of articles I had written for the Sentinel, even the announcement of my engagement that had been published in our hometown paper. "I told myself it was for Ethan, so he could know what you were doing. But I think it was really for me, a way to stay connected to you when I was too cowardly to reach out directly." The revelation that I had not been completely erased from family consciousness was both comforting and painful. They had been watching my life from afar all along, maintaining their distance not out of indifference but as part of the elaborate facade my father had constructed. A week into my stay, I received an unexpected visitor at my hotel. Luke Peterson, now a local business owner with a family of his own, had heard through the town's efficient grapevine that I was back. "I've been carrying this for years," he said as we sat in the hotel lobby. "I gave a statement about what I saw, that Ethan was driving, but when the official report came out different, I didn't push it. I was 17 and intimidated by your father. He came to see my parents, talked about potential liability issues if I misrepresented what happened. I backed down, and I've regretted it ever since." "Was it you?" I asked. "Did you tip off Detective Ramirez to review the case?" Luke shook his head. "No, but I wish I'd had that courage. When he contacted me as part of his review, I finally told the whole truth. Better 12 years late than never, I guess." As my extended stay stretched into its second week, Cameron flew out to join me, his presence providing the stable foundation I needed as I navigated the turbulent waters of family reconciliation. He approached my parents and Ethan with remarkable grace, neither accusatory nor overly conciliatory. "I'm not here to judge what happened before I knew Jessica," he told them during our first dinner together. "But I need you to understand who she is now, the incredible strength and integrity she's shown despite carrying a burden that was never hers to bear." His words seemed to pierce through my father's remaining defenses in a way mine couldn't. Later that evening, my father approached me alone, vulnerability replacing his usual authoritative demeanor. "I don't expect your forgiveness, Jessica," he said, his voice uncharacteristically unsteady. "What I did was unforgivable. But I want you to know that I recognize the damage I caused, to you, to Ethan, to our family. If there's any way to begin making amends, I'm willing to do whatever it takes." It was the most honest conversation we had ever had. I couldn't offer immediate absolution, the wounds were too deep, the betrayal too fundamental, but I acknowledged his overture as a possible beginning. "I don't know what our relationship looks like moving forward," I told him truthfully. "But I'm willing to find out, as long as we're building on truth from now on." As our time in New York drew to a close, we established tentative plans for the future. My parents would visit us in Chicago in the spring, and Ethan expressed interest in looking at graduate programs in the Midwest, a prospect that would bring him geographically closer to me. The night before our departure, my mother handed me a thick manila envelope. "These are copies of all the medical and insurance records related to Ethan's accident and treatment," she explained. "I want you to have them, to understand exactly what happened with the claims and settlements. No more secrets." It was a significant gesture, the final pieces of the puzzle that had shaped our family tragedy. I accepted the documents with the knowledge that reviewing them would be another painful but necessary step in reclaiming my history. As Cameron and I packed for our return flight, I reflected on the unexpected journey of the past 2 weeks. The family I had lost and grieved for years was not suddenly restored. Too much damage had been done for an easy reconciliation. But the truth had created space for something new to grow, something imperfect but authentic, built on acknowledgement rather than deception. "Are you ready to go home?" Cameron asked, zipping our shared suitcase closed. Home. Once a concept tied exclusively to the house we had just left, now firmly located in the life we had built together in Chicago. "Yes," I replied. "But I think I might be ready to come back too, eventually." The reckoning had been painful but necessary, not an ending, but the difficult beginning of a new chapter for all of us. 6 months after the confrontation that shattered and began to rebuild my family, I sat in my Chicago apartment surrounded by the medical and insurance documents my mother had given me. Cameron sat beside me, providing quiet support as I finally pieced together the full story of what had happened after Ethan's accident. The papers revealed the calculated nature of my father's deception. Insurance forms clearly showed that the policy would have denied coverage if the boat had been operated by someone under the legal age, a financial disaster that would have left my parents unable to afford Ethan's extensive medical needs. Legal correspondence between my father and the insurance company demonstrated how he had leveraged my confession and his influence to expedite the claims process. Most revealing was a letter from the district attorney's office, confirming that no charges would be pursued against me due to my age and lack of prior incidents. A handwritten note in my father's distinctive script in the margin read, "Crisis averted. No criminal record for Jessica, maximum coverage for Ethan's care secured." He thought he was protecting both of us, I said to Cameron, a complex mix of emotions washing over me. In his mind, he found the solution that minimized the damage. "At your expense," Cameron reminded me gently. "He sacrificed your relationship with the entire family to protect his reputation and finances." "Yes," I acknowledged. "But I don't think he anticipated how completely the lie would consume us all. I doubt he intended for me to become estranged for 12 years. Understanding the pragmatic reasons behind my father's initial deception didn't excuse it, but it helped me contextualize his choices. The man who had orchestrated the cover-up was the same father who had taught me to ride a bike, who had stayed up all night helping me with science fair projects, who had once been my hero before becoming the architect of my exile. Over the following months, we established a new pattern of careful, intentional connection. My parents visited Chicago as planned, the awkwardness of their first meeting with Cameron gradually giving way to genuine appreciation for the life we had built. My father, in particular, seemed humbled by the success I had achieved despite, or perhaps because of, the adversity I had faced. "Your investigative work is exceptional," he commented after reading a series of articles Cameron and I had written exposing corruption in the city's public housing authority. "You have a natural instinct for uncovering truth." The irony wasn't lost on either of us. Ethan's relationship with me evolved most dramatically. Free from the burden of misplaced blame, he embraced our reconnection with an enthusiasm that sometimes overwhelmed me. Weekly video calls became part of our routine, and he followed through on his interest in Midwestern graduate programs, eventually accepting an offer from Northwestern University's psychology department. I want to work with families affected by traumatic injuries, he explained during the call announcing his decision. Not just the physical rehabilitation, but the emotional rebuilding. I think I have some relevant experience to offer. His move to Chicago that fall marked a turning point. Having my brother in the same city, watching him build his own independent life despite his physical challenges, brought a joy I had nearly forgotten was possible. We established new traditions: Sunday brunches at our favorite neighborhood cafe, movie nights where we introduced Cameron to the obscure films we had loved as teenagers, holidays that slowly began to heal the associations with past estrangement. My parents remained in New York, but our contact became more regular and, gradually, more authentic. My mother, in particular, seemed determined to rebuild our relationship, calling several times a week with updates about her garden club or neighborhood news, ordinary conversations that slowly accumulated into a new normal. My father's journey was more complicated. His professional identity had been so intertwined with his self-perception that acknowledging his ethical failure in our family crisis required a profound reckoning. 6 months after our confrontation, he made a decision that surprised us all. He stepped down from his prestigious partnership to take a position teaching legal ethics at Columbia Law School. I've spent my career interpreting the law to serve my clients' interests, he explained when I questioned the career change. Now I want to help shape lawyers who understand that technical legality isn't the same as ethical behavior. It was as close to a public acknowledgement of his wrongdoing as he could manage, and I recognized the significance of the gesture. A year and a half after discovering the truth, I found myself facing an unexpected dilemma. The Chicago Sentinel was launching a special investigative series on how personal injury cases were handled in the legal system, with particular focus on how power and influence affected outcomes. My editor wanted me to write a piece about my own experience, the ultimate insider perspective on how a prominent attorney had manipulated the system to protect his interests. The journalist in me recognized the power of the story. The daughter in me hesitated at the public exposure of our family's painful history. I discussed the option with Ethan first, knowing he would be affected by any public revelation. "It's your story to tell, Jess," he said after considering the implications. "I think there might be value in sharing it. Other families who've been fractured by lies might see a path to healing. But whatever you decide, I'll support you." My parents' reactions were predictably divergent. My mother feared the public scrutiny but respected my right to share my experience. My father initially opposed the idea, then surprised me by offering to be interviewed for the piece, a gesture of accountability I hadn't anticipated. In the end, I wrote the article, carefully balancing journalistic integrity with compassion for my family. The piece, titled "The Weight of a Lie: How One Family's Deception Changed 4 Lives," was published on the 3rd anniversary of my discovery of the truth. It received widespread attention, sparking important conversations about ethics, accountability, and the complex dynamics of family loyalty. The response that meant most to me came from readers who recognized their own experiences in our story, people who had been scapegoated in their families, who had carried blame that wasn't theirs to bear, who were struggling to rebuild connections fractured by long-standing deceptions. One email in particular encapsulated why sharing our painful journey had been worth it. "After reading your story, I finally found the courage to confront the lie that has divided my family for 8 years. We're talking again for the first time since my brother's death. Thank you for showing me that the truth, however painful, offers the only real path to healing." That message, printed and framed, now hangs in my home office, a reminder that our most painful experiences can become bridges to others navigating similar terrain. My journey from family scapegoat to architect of my own truth hasn't been easy. The relationships rebuilt in the aftermath of our family's reckoning remain works in progress, fragile in some moments, surprisingly resilient in others. Trust, once shattered, rebuilds slowly, with setbacks and breakthroughs marking the irregular path toward reconciliation. What I've learned through this process is that truth, while essential, is only the beginning. It's what we choose to build on that foundation that determines whether our stories end in continued estrangement or hard-won connection. Thank you all for following my journey from blame to truth to healing. If you've experienced family secrets or unfair blame in your own life, I'd love to hear your stories in the comments. How did you handle it? Did you find resolution? Your experiences might help someone else find their way forward. Don't forget to like this video if it resonated with you, subscribe to my channel for more real-life stories about family dynamics and healing, and share with anyone who might need to hear that the truth, however delayed, still has the power to set us free. I'm grateful for this community and the chance to turn my painful experience into something that might help others navigate their own family challenges. Remember, it's never too late to reclaim your truth and write a new ending to your story.